I'll give him time.
Good evening and welcome to Scrutiny Review Panel. Scrutiny Review Panel 4. Yeah, I was going to say 2. Sorry.
So, good evening to members and guests, both here in Percival House and remotely, and to the public watching on YouTube. So welcome to the second meeting of Scrutiny Panel 4 for 2024-2025, the Strategy and Change Scrutiny Panel. This meeting will be scrutinising voluntary and community sector grant funding and the new Your Voice, Your Town engagement process. The agenda for the meeting is on the Ealing Council website, so if as a member of the public you Google Ealing Democracy, you'll be able to navigate to it from there. It's a hybrid meeting. I see we have plenty of councillors here in the room for quoracy. So yeah, turning to the agenda, beginning with item 1, apologies for absence. I welcome Councillor Young, who's replacing Councillor Kumar.
No,
right?
it was a mistake.
You were always supposed to be on it. Ah, right. I welcome you anyway. Okay. Are there any other apologies?
We have Councillor Murtaza who'll be a few minutes late.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Haley. Thank you. Urgent matters, there are none. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations? No. Right, so we move on to matters to be considered in private, there are none. So we move on to the minutes of the last meeting. So yes, there were quite a lot of pages, I won't go through them page by page, but I see Councillor Young raising a hand.
Not a council business. They don't book this.
Okay. Oh, I see. Yes. Well, we can note that. Yeah. Right. Okay. That's fine. Great. Are there any other points on the minutes of the last meeting? No. So does the panel agree the minutes? Thank you. The item 6 is panel work programme. So there've been no changes to this since last time, other than that the visit to a community engagement event in another London borough would now take place after this meeting rather than before it. Yeah, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I can't remember if that's what we agreed last time, but are we going to Barking and Dagenham? Is that right?
Yeah, I think it is, isn't it? Yes, that's right.
Yes.
I see Amanda nodding on the screen. Yes, it is. Yes.
I mean, it's the other end of London.
We
Is
have the
anything
Elizabeth
nearer?
line. We have the Elizabeth line now, so we can do amazing things. Yeah. I mean, I think the feeling was that they have some success in this area that they can demonstrate to us. So it's sort of not just looking at an arbitrary other borough, it's looking at somewhere that has something that we might be able to learn from. Yeah, so, right. Yeah, any other comments on the work programme? No. Yeah, is the work program, do we have to agree it each time? I'm not sure we do. We do, yes. So is the work programme agreed? Yeah, great, thanks. So now we go on to the first substantive item, which is voluntary community sector grant funding. So I'd like to invite Amanda Askham, who's online, who's the Strategic Director of Strategy and Change, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bourne. And firstly, apologies, I can't be with you in person tonight. I normally would be. I'm just recovering from a small operation at home, so I'm really sorry I can't be there. And Carol Sam, the Assistant Director of Equalities and Engagement, has joined me this evening because she has a key role in both of these pieces of project work. So Carol and I are available to answer any of your questions. We'd hope to have some guests tonight, but half term has got in our way of that. So we can take forward any questions with our community colleagues if they come up during the report. So the two items are closely linked this evening. Both are about how we work in a deeper way with communities and hear more from our partners, both in voluntary sector and community sector, and directly from residents. So we will start with the voluntary and community sector grant funding programme, which Carol oversees on behalf of the council, and there are a number of pieces within that. So we quite often have discussions with councillors and with voluntary sector about where can they go for funding. It's such a key part of every voluntary sector organisation. So we have a number of things set up for VCS and a number of signposting pieces of work that we do as well. So I'll take you through the report section by section and just give you some rough headlines from what's in there, and then we will open up for questions. So the main piece of our grant funding programme is our sort of major grant funds, which are about 2.4 million a year. That's a 4-year rolling programme, and a lot of that is around commissioning services together with our VCS partners. So that's thinking about needs in our communities and then going out from our individual teams. So that might be children's services looking for respite care for fosterers, it might be our health and wellbeing services, it might be through our adult services, but we go out with specific asks of VCS partners, and there is a process through which they make bids into that grant funding pot, which are aligned to their missions and values. So it's a way of us asking for support from our local VCS sector to commission services that other boroughs might, for example, commission from big national organisations or out of borough. So we want to make sure that we keep as much of our business, if you like, and our resource and our spend within our own VCS communities. So that's quite a rigorous and long-term piece of work with our larger grant funding for quite predetermined outcomes that we want to have from those bits of commissioning. So VCS partners can approach those pieces of work in any way they like, and we have a panel that assesses their bids to us, but we are very clear about the outcomes that we want to achieve from those pieces of work. So that's the first sort of set of things we do, and we have a very good monitoring process where our commissioners, who are scattered around the council, work with those VCS partners to have rigorous monitoring and evaluation, so we make sure that we're getting the outcomes we intend to from that significant spend. And there's a very good conversation with VCS partners about how we shape those pieces of work. We've then got our other sources of funding that we have, which are more directly service led. So that might be things like our community climate grants programme. It might be projects to support mental health. So there's specific pots of funding that come out through the life cycle of the council that deliver our council plan, where we say, here is a call out to organisations, here is funding available for the things that we want to achieve. as a council. So again, they're quite directed by us, the outcomes we want to have, but they're very much co-designed with communities about how we go about delivering those pieces of work. And also in there, I've included our small grants programme. So that's awards up to £5,000, and that's much more about making sure that VCS organisations who might want some match funding or who might want to fund small projects, much more about things that they choose to do and can come to us against a set of criteria for our small grants programme. So there's a range of things in there which are specific, led by us, and a range of things that are led by our VCS partners. And that's our direct funding, if you like, into VCS organisations. We then have a fantastic platform. If you've not had a chance to have a look at that, I would thoroughly recommend that you do the Do Something Good platform, which I got terribly excited about recently when we had it moves on all the time and there are new features, but it's a very good place for voluntary sector organisations to connect with each other and to connect with us and to see what projects are happening and to be able to connect with council services and say, we could offer some support in here, we could work with you on that. So it is a fantastic connecting, networking, sources of funding. We push things out through there. If we hear funding from other sources, we highlight it on there. So that really is a key resource for our VCS partners, and we get some great feedback about how they engage with that website. And then the fourth category I've put in there is cost of living, because that is increasing. What started as a sort of temporary response after COVID has now become a permanent team within the council, and a very good collegiate team with VCS partners. So Louisa, who's our cost of living lead, meets regularly with a whole range of VCS partners and talk about how we can use our combined assets. That might be spaces, it might be a bit of funding, it might be relationships that we have, but how do we use those things to support people really well in that cost of living space so that our residents get as much support as they can, whether that's about applying for benefits, accessing things digitally, food banks. There's a whole range of things in that cost of living programme. And last year we were really pleased to be able to provide lots of people with new laptops and digital connectivity. We also provide data and SIM cards through our community hubs. So there's lots and lots of support, and that is very much hand in hand. We could not do that work. We couldn't do any of this work, but particularly that cost of living work is very driven by our VCS colleagues. They do a tremendous amount of fantastic work in that space, and we draw that together through our cost of living work. So there's a number of places, all slightly different in their relationships and all slightly different about how we signpost that funding and support from the council. And happy to pick up any questions in any of those pieces. Carol, did you want to add anything to that? No,
Very
thank you.
Great, thank you. I guess it would be logical to take them in the order they're in the agenda. So first there's the main grant funding programme, which is section 1 of the paper. Does Councillor Mohan?
Just two simple questions, Chair. In terms of funding, if some of it doesn't get spent, what happens to the fund? Is it sort of taken forward? And secondly, how do we advertise the program for the public and the VCS? Thank you.
Okay, Amanda, would you like to answer both of those?
Yeah, of course. So, sorry. Oh, sorry, I missed something there. Thought there was another question. So in terms of the funding, it is a 4-year programme, and if any, it would be very unusual for the funding not to be spent. We have quite a competitive bidding process for these commissions in the annual large grant funding. But if any of it is underspent, it rolls forward into the next year. And if we get to the end of that 4-year programme and we have any underspends, then we would we would go out with further commissions along the same sorts of outcomes. So that funding programme is really very outcome driven, things that we want to achieve, and we might say, actually, we need a bit more spend on mental health or whatever it might be. That's a place we can put more of that grant funding, but it is very unusual that that's unspent. Well, I've been here for 2 years, and looking back at officer decision notes, it is always fully subscribed and spent. And the second piece about the advertising. So when we start that cycle, we use all sorts of different places, our social media, our Do Something Good platform, our existing relationships. We have a strategic partnership board with VCS. We will use all of those ways to say these are the things that we're looking to commission in the next 4 years of the programme.
Thank you.
So I've got one on here. Does anyone? Yes, Councillor Taylor. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Amanda, I know we haven't published the criteria here, so I mean, I'm not about to go to ask about the criteria, but is that criteria kind of agreed or come to some kind of agreement with the voluntary sector beforehand what the priorities are? And secondly, I suppose I'm sort of a veteran of past issues to do with grants. Is there opportunities for newer organisations to be able to apply, as opposed to what often sometimes happens in other places where it's the usual organisations always get the money?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So in answer to your first question, so the criteria are very clear against the Commission. How deeply we go into sort of co-designing those with our VCS partners is a really good question, and I think it slightly varies across the piece. I think some of them are direct commissions that would say, we want these things, these outcomes, put the tender out there. It's almost like tendering for a piece of work. One of the criteria is you've got to be a local VCS organisation, so that's why it's a VCS round of grants. Others are a bit more open about this is what we're trying to achieve. We're open to designing the criteria, but it's a really good question, and I will definitely feed that back into the process, because it is very good practice to have those criteria co-designed with our VCS. It's a really good point. And in terms of who it is, the person who scores the highest. So it's not about existing relationships, and it's not about how long the organisation has been running. But nevertheless, those things are more, if you like, stable and long-lasting history and better relationships probably mean it's easier for people to write the bid in a way that we understand and score. So again, it's a really good challenge and definitely something that I will take back.
Yeah, if I could follow on from that, so it's many years since there was a move from just traditional standalone grant funding to a commissioning model, but I'm interested in what you're saying about stability. So sort of roughly what proportion of organisations, well, so roughly what proportion of pieces of commissioned work do the same organisations get repeatedly in multiple rounds?
So I would have to have a look at that to give you exact statistics, but that was a question I asked when I first joined and was first involved in this, because we were just at the beginning of the 4-year funding. So the 4 years, it's a programme where the same organisation keeps their funding for the 4 years if they meet the monitoring and the criteria. So we don't go out every year with a new ask in that. So, and that allows us, and my understanding is that was following feedback from VCS, that actually that stability of knowing that they would have that funding over a long-term period and that they could plan on accordingly was very helpful. So we don't go out annually. It's a 4-year programme, but the funding is awarded annually and is based on monitoring and evaluation against the outcomes we want to achieve. So it gives us some flexibility to reshape things with VCS partners. And in terms of whether the same people got the funding in this 4-year cycle as got it in the last 4-year cycle, I would have to check the numbers, but there definitely were a number of, instinctively, I would say it was about 60-40, 60% of organisations carrying on with what they'd done before, 40% of organisations being new and coming in and taking those grants over. And some of the grants are new as well. We ask for different things. So there is definitely, we are definitely seeing new organisations being able to pick up these grants and work with us.
And new
Thanks.
partnerships, Amanda, just to add to that, are new partnerships forming? New partnerships forming?
Yes, that's definitely true. So what we sometimes see in some of these bids, that's a good point, Carol, thank you, is that we have a collective comes forward. Sorry, I'm echoing. A collective comes forward with a response to one of these commissions, if you like. So that's definitely something that we've seen working differently.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Young, you wanted to come in.
Yes, is the Do Something Good website hosted on Ealing's website, or is it a separate entity? In other words, does it just deal with people in Ealing, or does it serve a wider area?
Sorry, we're going to do them section by section. So are there any more questions on section 1 before we move off that? Don't think so. So section 2 was some other streams. I don't know if anyone's got questions on section 2. I have one question, which is the small grants programme. So if I understand rightly, the individual grants can be up to 5,000. Is that right? Is it? So what's the total amount of the aggregate total of the small grants?
So the total that we have in the budget every year is around 80,000, but we don't always spend all of that, and that again rolls forward. So that's very much on a we offer it out at a certain point in the year, and we take the bids that we get for that, assess them against the criteria, and if any of that is unspent, then we put it out again. Last year, I think we added some of that small grants funding into our warm spaces funding for VCS over the winter period. So we generally spend that with VCS. We don't always spend every last penny of it in £5,000 chunks with individual organisations, but mostly.
Well, I guess, yeah. So following on from that, would there be a case for having to making that more general rather than it being focused on a particular kind of aspect each year or each round? You're saying it's the focus on supporting well-being, which is fairly broad, but presumably there are small voluntary organisations which aren't doing something which would be covered by that, and so weren't able to apply. If it's sometimes underspent, would there be an argument for broadening it to kind of any small organisation and have a comparison of which is doing would make best use of the money?
Yeah, so we think every year, the years following COVID recovery, I think both of the years that we've had in 22-23 and 23-24, we've had a focus of the small grants on wellbeing, because that was what we heard from our VCS groups that they wanted to be funded for and what our community and residents needed. We always take some feedback from VCS about what the small grants programme could and should be used for. So it is, and that is given annually. So we are kind of flexible, and we talk to our VCS strategic group about what might be important to them.
Okay, Councillor Mohan.
In terms of small grants, if there are quite a few groups doing the same kind of work, or kind of if there is duplicacy, how do we kind of prioritize, or how do we differentiate?
So if we get lots of grants for the same sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, if there are groups more or less doing the same kind of surveys.
So I think, for example, if we say there are wellbeing needs, we will have groups doing the same thing but working with different communities. So that might be in a different geographical area, or it might be with different parts of the community, or working in a slightly different way. So we have had quite a few requests for support for mental health and well-being, and that might be with young people in Northolt, or it might be with a different group in a different place. We tend to fund as long as they meet the criteria. We fund, so we don't make a judgment about is this VCS group better than this one. We just say this is the work that we want to support. Let's fund it, and we are able to do that through our small grants fund. So we haven't come to a point where we've had, you know, £200,000 worth of applications against a pot of £80,000. So we tend to, in all this work with our VCS, we work absolutely hand in hand, and there's a very strong relationship through that strategic group and through Ealing and Hounslow CVS, who are the voice of our. We pay them a small sum to be the voice of our community groups, and they represent over 300 community groups. So we always talk with them about how we allocate our funding and the themes for our funding. So it's a very good to and fro talking about how we do this work together.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Sharma?
I just wanted to, can you hear me all right? Yeah. I wanted to find out a bit more about the Community Climate Grants Programme in terms of how we can be more proactive and widen it to include more members in the community. Are you able to say something about that?
So this is only, we've got a new climate board, which is chaired by Peter George, Strategic Director for Economy and Sustainability. And as part of that board, there is a review of how we work with residents and community groups to think about our response to the climate crisis. So that's definitely something that's under review. And if you have some thoughts on that or some challenge about how we do it currently, I think Peter would be very open to hearing about that and hearing. We absolutely want to make sure that as many people as possible can access that and respond. So very happy to take that back to Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Mataza.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, and looking at the some of the underspent grants, how do we advertise these grants that these are available for the communities? Are they well advertised and the people know about it? Thank you.
Was that a question about underspent grants?
More of a question about advertising. You know, so considering there are sometimes underspends, do you think there's more advertising could be done to make more organisations aware? Carol may have a view on this as well. I think our advertising and our reach is pretty good with our grant funding. I wonder if sometimes the balance of the effort we ask people to put in and the sum of money, particularly in the small grants funding, if the bid process is too onerous, if you're a very small organisation, you don't have administrative staff that can help and support you to write those bids, and it's probably not worth it unless you're going to get the full £5,000. So I think we're always refining that process and thinking, how do we make that easier? We put in some support last year. Cost of living team in particular are very good at supporting organisations to write bids for things. So the challenge is always there to make sure that the grant funding gets out the door, but we have to be careful with our governance and make sure it's going to organisations who are using it well and on behalf of our residents. So it's always a balance about how onerous the bid writing piece is. I think that's the bit we'd have to change to have more access.
And just to add to that, Amanda, I think it's very rare that even with that small sum we do get the underspend, and the application form is relatively loose without putting too much onus on groups that come together to bid for that funding, and it's often spent. And because as part of the submission as well, they're quite the expenditure items are quite explicit, and it's easy to spend as opposed to underspend in terms of what they're seeking to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, So I was sort of, from what Amanda was saying, I was thinking whether we might be thinking about a recommendation to make the process simpler, but maybe what you're saying, Carol, it's pretty simple already, perhaps.
Yeah, because sorry, can you hear me? The application process is because you don't want to make it too onerous on the organisation, but at the same time still maintain in a sense of governance, so you can ensure that the money isn't used for not what it's supposed to be, because it is small. It is a relatively small pot of money, but it's more about the impact. But yeah, it's very rare. I think. I mean, we could certainly review it, but I think it's quite relatively straightforward and quite simplified without being too onerous for the value of the sum of grant.
Thanks. And yes, in terms of publicising them, one thing would be to write to all charities that are based in the borough. Would that be something which you thought of doing?
So that tends to go out through EHCVS, who are our voice of the community. So they have a reach across all VCS organisations and their membership group. But we could certainly, I think, a recommendation to make sure that reaches as wide as it possibly can be. And I think the point about making sure that the theme is not too tightly constrained is really important, so that organisations can make a bid into that. So there's something about a recommendation which covers making sure everybody gets it, making sure it's broad enough for everybody to apply for it, and making sure that the process is not too onerous, I think is the way that we want our small grant scheme to work.
Great. OK, good. That's very helpful. Thank you. So there's nothing more on that section. Section 3, do something good. Councillor Young was already asking about that, about whether it's a separate website or whether it's on the Ealing website.
I'll bring Carol in on that. I think
there is work on the way to bring it into. I'm not the technical person. It sits outside of our Ealing main website, but it is a source. It's a platform to be used by our voluntary and community sector within the borough, and also residents in the borough and colleagues across the directorates. But that's not to stop any external organisation putting the information on in terms of grants or services available, but it sits separately. But we are talking with our colleagues within the comms team in terms of how that sits. But also I think we need to be mindful that the branding is quite separate, and that's what's quite beneficial for some of the local voluntary and community organisations. It itself, they can access it, they can put information about themselves, and it's also a matching and mapping tool in terms of colleagues internally seeking information from voluntary and community organisations in terms of services they want to deliver, voluntary organisations. But I don't think we've really had an exploration of the merits of bring it in-house in terms of the branding. That's something we probably need to think about, but it's been working well so far, and it was established following COVID, and it was used successfully and continues to be. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Amanda, on that.
I think that's probably as a separate thing. There is a piece of work going on to reprocure our website, because I don't want to get too technical here because I'm not an expert, but my understanding of our current platform is it's not ever so flexible, and our new platform needs to be more flexible so we can host things with their own sort of functionality. We couldn't do what we do on Do Something Good on our existing website, so it needs to sit separate at the moment. At the point when it could sit and have the functionality that it has within our own web platform, then we will think about it and how we marry that branding up. Does that answer the intent of your question?
Happy with that answer? Yeah, great. Any other questions on this section? I've just got one myself, which is just, again, do you have a rough feel for the sort of total amount of money raised through Do Something Good? Understanding that there's pots of money from different funders.
That's a good question. Carol, do we know that?
I should know at the top of my head because a colleague of mine, Kofi, took a paper to SLT, but I can't remember. But during the course of this meeting, I'll try and find it. But I know it's quite significant, and I think that the key is the exposure of the organisations to reach each other and put a call out for. So if for example an organisation said I'm interested in volunteers. They can do a search and find all the organisations that are looking for volunteers. So it's a real good opportunity for matching. Also put in lots of organisations. Some of the housing developers I've seen recently put on there some funding that's available, and it's easily accessible to a lot of the voluntary community organisations, and is widely used also by our EHCVS colleagues and other major voluntary organisations such as SCA and GOSAD and some of the bigger players who support the smaller organisations. But at this point in time, I could get back to you though in terms of the, but it's quite significant sums.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it'd be helpful to have an answer afterwards on that. So any other questions on this chunk? So if not, so the final section is the funding that comes through the cost of living team. Does anyone have any questions on that? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, Amanda, Carol, it's not meant to be a taxing question, but obviously if we're given laptops and things, have we had any success stories out of that where people have actually done their CVs, applied for jobs, sort of thing, and been successful?
So we've had lots of great feedback in the cost of living work, and we can certainly share some of those case studies. We have a whole bank of case studies where people have told us about the impact on their lives through sharing. The laptops were a huge success, and actually quite a lot of them went to young people who were doing exams and trying to catch up on schoolwork and didn't have that facility at home. And the same with the data, because that allows us to have connectivity at home. So we can certainly share some of those case studies.
Sure, go ahead.
And I suppose a follow-up is, it's often related to my own work actually, and I think about people in temporary accommodation. Do you do any work with them at all? Because particularly people maybe in hostels or people maybe not in long-term temporary accommodation, because kids still need help, don't they, as well with doing work, homework, things like that.
Yeah, so we do lots. The temporary accommodation team and Louisa's cost of living team work very closely together, and particularly at different times of year. So Louisa did a big campaign last year with the temporary accommodation team around Christmas time to make sure that all of our children living in temporary accommodation had a Christmas present. But she works with them throughout the year to say, let's make sure we know who's living in temporary accommodation and what their needs in terms of benefits and debt and children and support might be. So yeah, absolutely, working very closely with lots of teams throughout the council, but particularly the TA team.
Great, thanks very much. So any more questions on this section? If not, I think we've got some ideas of recommendations around, we can formulate the detail afterwards, but broadly around publicising the grants more widely. I think that probably could go broader than just the small grants, and making sure that for the small grants, making sure that it's not too onerous process to apply, and that the theme is broad enough to not to be too restrictive. Any other thoughts or recommendations or comments on those? Councillor Taylor, you seem to be, you were just sort of scratching your chin. Yes, Councillor Mataza, yes.
I just want to ask a little question and make a little suggestion that when you are distributing the laptops, what is the criteria? I'm asking this because some of the children with ADHD, and they are given laptops in school, but they don't have that facility at home. So is there any way we can find out or include this if the children have some mild learning difficulties, they can have laptop?
Yes. Well, I guess the question is, does that happen at the moment? And if not, that would be a recommendation to add that as a criteria. Yeah.
So I will check back with Louisa, but I think she would say they work very, very closely with schools. So really, we're working with schools and classroom teachers to say who needs what and what support do they need. And it might not be laptops, it might be something different that young people need. So the cost of living team is entirely sort of relationships and connection based. So Louisa is and the team, Sam and Kerry, are out talking all the time to VCS partners, to schools, to temporary accommodation. So that information would probably come through schools around what was needed for individual young people.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could we could talk offline. I mean, if there isn't already a specific criteria for IT equipment for neurodiverse, can't say it, children, then that probably would be a good recommendation if it isn't already in there. So I guess we can talk offline whether that's already in there.
I'll check that.
Good. Okay, great. Thanks. Any more suggestions, recommendations on this report? Oh yes, sorry, Councillor Sharma. Yes.
I just wondered whether we could explore it is on, yeah, sorry, thank you. I just wondered if we could explore the Community Climate Grants Programme a bit more, because it is quite high priority, and perhaps we can explore how we can reach more people in bringing about having higher energy efficiency improvements, for example.
Yeah, so we could have a recommendation about trying to expand that scheme and perhaps publicise it more, so that, again, well, thinking in with what we've already said about publicising it more, that would be one of the ones perhaps that is a bit of a Cinderella at the moment. Yeah, good, thanks. Good. So any more suggestions for recommendations? If not, we'll move on. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Carol, did you want to add something? Sorry.
Oh, hi, thank you. I found a figure while you were speaking. So in terms of funding, so since 2020, we've supported 14. We've used the platform as a crowdfunding platform for campaigns, and we have raised 433,000. That's just using it as a crowdfunding platform with some of the local volunteering community groups.
Great, that's very good.
I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, it is. It shows the scale of it. Very good. Yes, good. Great. Okay, so we'll move on to the other item, which is the Your Voice, Your Town programme. And again, Amanda, if you can introduce that report, please.
Yes, happy to. Thank you very much. So Your Voice, Your Town started about 18 months ago and grew out of ward forums and then town forums and into a place where we really wanted to make sure that this was a communities in the lead model. So we've got very diverse communities across the 7 towns, so we wanted to make sure that we had a distinctive voice from each town, and we want to make sure that we have as many residents as possible in each of those towns having some choice and some control over the activities that happen in their town and the resources that come into their town through various council and community and VCS mechanisms. So Your Voice, Your Town is a very different approach. The reason we're going to see Barking and Dagenham is because they have the only similar approach across London boroughs, which is much more about communities having choice to make the criteria about projects that go ahead in their communities. So this is us stepping back as a council and making sure that residents have a say over what happens in their local place. So from April 2023, we had a research phase and we undertook digital surveys, desk reviews. We went to the places that communities naturally gathered and meet and talked to communities in their own places. We got quite a different response than we would if we did a more formal kind of consultation that we might have done in the past. We had deep conversations and we talked about a number of 3 themes that communities were interested in. We then went on in that research phase to have some events in each town, one in each town, where we invited people to come and have a big conversation with us about the things that mattered to them. And we took a very active listening and deep listening approach, rather than starting with, here's what the council's doing, here's the things that we want to solve, this is what we want. We thought we'll just start with that, open ears to say, what are communities interested in, what do communities want to take forward, and that got us to a different relationship with communities, and we had some feedback from communities about how much they appreciated the way that we went about the engagement, but also there was some feedback to say, we are interested in civic participation, we're interested in activity, we will do more, but we've got to have some trust that if we step forward into these spaces, our ideas will be taken forward, and that we will see some action as a result of what we say. So lots of interesting things about relationship with the council, but also within communities, and what we need to take forward to build a foundation for the work. So what started as what we thought might be not a simple and straightforward, but a convening of people in a place to make some choices about what projects would go forward. We quite soon heard from communities that they wanted something deeper and a more relationship based, trust and confidence, the right kinds of activities. So we pivoted a little bit and started to think about how we would make that real for our communities and how we would work as a council in that different way. And you'll see that we've got in there some different pieces of work. So strengthening foundational ingredients, which is in section 3, we heard a lot from our communities about we have to build the right kind of spaces. So people don't want to be called into a council meeting, they want us to meet them where they already are. Those spaces have to be safe, we have to have a good way of having discussions about things where different people will hold different ideas. We need to be able to talk about that, deliberate it well, make sure that we are inclusive of all voices, but come to a conclusion and take things forward and be clear and transparent about how we're doing that work. So there was a lot in there about the kind of how in the relationship building. There was also some feedback about valuing and understanding the assets that already existed in communities and building on those. Good, clear communication, so effective follow-up. There was a feeling that actually there's a lot of, it's a bit of a technical term, but a lot of extraction. The council quite often goes into communities and says, give us your view and opinion on this, and then we take it back into our policy making and our decisions, but we don't close that feedback loop in saying, you know, we heard and we talked, you told us this and we did this with it. So lots more about that effective follow-up action, and if people raise things with us, they don't want to be sort of handed between different teams, they just want to see a council responding well. So lots of feedback in there about a more human, more responsive relationship first council across all of our teams. That was really key to this approach, and we recognise that we have work to do on that. And then the second piece is, what action are we going to take? So what is this work going to lead to? And there's really 3 parts to that. So some are, we will have Your Voice, Your Town activities, which are at a town level, and they will carry on throughout the year. So I'm going to ask Carol just to give us a feeling of those activities and the engagement pieces that we're going to be doing. They are things that will be locally driven by activity that's already there, by people who are interested in a specific thing. So we might have a group of our community who's interested in green spaces. They might be different from the people who are interested in children's mental health services. So we might have different groups working on different projects and activities on a rolling basis, all under an umbrella of Your Voice, Your Town activities. Then we've got some anchor projects, so they are things that will be decided collectively by the town team, and we will say these are big projects that people across the town are interested in. We're hearing this as a priority and we want to move this forward across the whole town as a big piece of funding and a big piece of work. And then we'll have some Your Voice, Your Town borough-wide activities, which might be things that they might be things that we are interested in as a council, but we might prioritise slightly differently. So an example we've used of this before is street lighting. We've heard from quite a lot of our engagement that people are interested in safe spaces. So we might be thinking we're already providing some services around safe spaces, but we need to prioritise A more than B, and we need to do it in this place sooner than that place. So there might be borough-wide projects that we take up through Your Voice Your Town, but all of that activity will come under that Your Voice Your Town, and will be very distinctive to each of the 7 towns. So the priorities, there are some similarities across the towns, but there are also some differences, and we need to make sure that we can work in that way. So that's the phase that we're in at the moment, and we want to make sure that the priorities that we've heard back from the engagement we've already had. We absolutely acknowledge that we haven't reached every resident in every corner of every town. We need to keep going with that, and we need to go back round again and say, this is what we heard from our first set of engagement activity. These are the priorities that are emerging for your town. Are these the right ones? Can we make sure that we take these into a space where we're now starting to set up and fund projects? So we're in that kind of operationalization. Oh, that's too hard to say. I'm not even going to try it. Making it operational by setting up the activity and agreeing the priorities for each town. So then the next stage on operations and governance, there is a lot to do in that space. So priorities identified, and we'll talk a little bit about the kind of what's next in identifying those priorities and where we go. But we've also got to set up the town's teams, and we need to make sure that the governance is right in those, and then the mix is right. That's a place where we will have councillors, we'll have VCS groups, we'll have residents who are interested in particular activities, we'll have council teams. So we need to make sure that the balance of those town teams is right, and that we stay in that communities in the lead model, but have a space for everybody to come into those teams. So we've got to agree roles and responsibilities in that governance. I know when we've come to various briefings with councillors before, there's been questions about who is the chair, what's the role of the councillor, what's the role of the community, how do we make sure that we have a diverse range of community voices and one isn't too dominant in a place against another. So we've got to be really careful about the governance and setup of those town teams and those roles and responsibilities. Then we're doing a lot of work around the budgets that we're allocating into the 7 towns to make sure that when the priorities are ready, we can start setting up projects quickly. It circles back to that foundational piece about making sure that we follow through. We can't just ask for priorities and do nothing about them. We've got to start those projects up and running and make sure that the funding is there to do that. So we've allocated funding. I'll perhaps come on to funding in a minute and explain that. And then we're going to, we want to see the activity, we want to see and celebrate the activity, some of which is already happening in communities, but we have definitely heard from the events that we did in the summer that more projects and more activity around things are, there's an appetite for people to participate and lead those pieces of work. So we want to see those things getting off the ground, led by local communities. I'll touch on a little bit about communications, and then I'll talk about funding, and then perhaps we'll delve into some of the detail of this through questions. We have had a set of internal communications, which Carol might want to talk about a little bit more, where we're having communities in the lead training for members. The last session of that is this week. We've had breakfast events for across the council to heads of service, so that we really understand what the Your Voice Your Town model is and how we adapt the way that we deliver things and do things and our mindset around it. We've had lunch and learn events, which has brought in a broader staff audience, lots of participation in those, lots of questions. We're having communities in the lead workshops, generating ideas and insights, sharing what we've heard from residents, and then we're starting to develop that engagement calendar, which brings together things that are already happening in communities, things that are already happening in the council in each of those 7 towns. So we've been doing a lot of work to build that set of activities that comes under Your Voice, Your Town, whether they're smaller local ones, whether they're the anchor projects, or whether they're the big cross-borough ones. That's all coming together into a kind of package of activity across the piece. And then just lastly on the budget, we have £480,000 in our 24-25 budget ready to be shared out across the towns. We've got a formula for doing that, which we can share with you to see which how much each town will get. That comes from what used to be our ward forum funding. That pot is sitting there ready to fund activity in each of the towns, so we will be able to start projects immediately. Our next lot of funding comes through the neighbourhood infrastructure levy, where we can spend 15% of our SIL, our community infrastructure levy, which comes from our big developments. That will go through Your Voice, Your Town. So we're creating a pipeline of funding that will come through to make sure that we can fund the projects that come out of Your Voice, Your Town. And in addition to that, we want to make sure that if there are fantastic ideas coming out of these Your Voice, Your Town activities and priorities, that we can take them forward. So there are already service budgets, there are pots of funding nationally and locally, there are other places that we can tap into to assemble a funding model. So another piece of intensive work around making sure there's going to be funding coming in for those projects. So we're establishing the priorities, we're establishing the governance, and then we're establishing the funding, so that all of those 3 things come together and the activities get going. Those priority establishing events are starting in November, so we'll make sure we're starting with going to where communities are. We've got the priorities that have already been articulated in each place. We're gathering more people into those and saying, is this right? Are there other things that we need to add? So we've got a timetable of activities starting now, which will lead into some larger events where we say, these are the priorities that are now agreed, let's have a call for projects, which again we can share with you. That's probably enough of me talking. So there's lots of richness of detail in there. Happy to talk about any of those elements through questions or whatever else is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just kick off with something that's directly related to something you said towards the end, and then we'll open it up. I think this time we'll have questions on anything in the anything in the area, anything in the paper. But yeah, you're talking about events in November, and November starts this week. I mean, is that isn't there a risk of what's happened at earlier stages in this process of there being just the basic letting people know in enough time to be able to attend things being not happening very well?
Yeah, so we know that we're travelling at an uncertain pace, I suppose it's safe to say, and it feels as if we're saying the events will definitely happen then, and then we're thinking, oh yikes, they are happening, we'll send things out. We just need to get into the rhythm of our communities. These are community-led events. The things that are starting in November are the things that have come out of all of those workshops saying we're holding a pop-up event. Carol, I don't know if you can share can you share a taste of those or tell us about the first events?
So basically what we've done, we've found out what's actually taking place amongst and within the communities and some of the initiatives. So we're starting, so if, for example, and this is going to where, and the point Amanda made, and this is the feedback that came, it's going to where the communities are, and we're going to those places, and I'll just give a run through some of the ones we're going to, and then we're going to populate it with more dates and more places, but it's going to where those communities are and saying, these are the priorities you've said in a particular town. And like Amanda said, we'll have the platform for them to vote. So for example, I'm just looking at the spreadsheet. There's the dental bus for the under 5s, and colleagues are working really hard in the team to put these plans. There's the autumn booster COVID flu jab for the over 60s. So again, so the under 5s targeting mums over 65s. There's the Acton Market Reduce and Recycle Hub. There's the Ealing Clothes Mend and Natter, Ukrainian Christmas Art, Knit and Natter Christmas Fair. Then it goes through Norfolk High, Greenford Tube Station. So we are starting to pull together, and by next week we'll have a more firmed up list of events across the board where the communities are. This is what we know at the moment. We've put the call out for with our voluntary and community groups, but in addition to that, through the lunch and learn and the sessions we had in our internal teams, we found out what our colleagues are doing in terms of aligning up those initiatives. So, for example, when we get to the final big town event where we're saying, so this is what we've gone to each of the towns, we've played back the priorities, this is what people have voted for, or they have said this, we're able to then curate a large town event of each of the 7 towns to start linking up some specific projects and initiatives that our colleagues are also doing, looking at actually economies of scale where we can leverage some of those. I'm probably jumping ahead, but in terms of, so we've got the priorities, we've started to identify. People said, actually, yes, this sounds about right, you know, of the 5, and when we get to the town, these are the 3 top ones. So there will be a host of things happening through from November to December. We are hoping to at least do 1 a day, starting very soon. And we are going at pace, but the intention is also to get members involved as soon as we can. I know these are some of the early ones, but we will say to members, would you like to come out? These are the calendar events, and would you like to come along to some of these? I don't know if that helps to answer.
Members are already involved in some of those events. So these are not, this is us responding to communities saying, some of us will come if you host a big event in our community hall. Some people will come, but actually a much wider group of people won't come, and we need to go to the community to start saying, this is where the activity takes place, this is how that you join in. So members are already at some of these forums. We know we've got very strong councillor support in lots of different places in the community, and these are events that the community are saying to us, this is where people naturally gather who would want to have a voice into this space. So we've got to do that piece of work first, and I think probably, Councillor Ball, the events that you're referring to, which are the if you like, the anchor events, the bigger set pieces about here's the priority setting, they will come, you know, 4 to 6 weeks. We need to do this work. We've heard from communities that we must do this as part of our trust and relationship. Otherwise, we're just getting to the people who would come into that hall when they're first invited. So those events will have a slightly longer lead in time, but we are planning those dates as we speak. They've got to be in community places, and they've got to be at the right times for communities. So it's not as simple for us as booking a hall and booking a venue, but we have noted the need for a longer lead in time than we've given before on those big events, and we'll make sure that happens.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, certainly, I absolutely accept what you're saying in terms of not wanting it just to be the usual suspects, and I think that was a problem with some of the initial meetings. So it's good to go out to community events, but just reinforcing that councillors and also a lot of people who are active in the community have really busy diaries. So, you know, there's need to be a long lead in. Yeah, Councillor Raza.
I think what's generally coming out from all of this is that it's all a bit confusing. We've had our little breakouts where we have to come along as members, and we've done sort of role plays and learnt about how to engage with the community, which we do anyway, but I guess we're learning how to do it better. There's a slight concern about how we were all bunched together as a town, because taking Greenford individually as a Greenford councillor, Central Greenford in itself is literally 4 separate communities, because we're divided by the A40 and the Greenford Road. So even my ward is 4 different communities, which are very separate and won't talk to each other, are very identify very separately. When we did do the town sort of event where we were asking things around, it was based in North Greenford, So Central Greenford and Greenford Broadway were, shall we say, not really involved in that conversation. It needed to be. I know it's not. It's very difficult to actually make sure that you can do this in a sort of, especially geographically, and especially as we're kind of let down by where we can host things with venues and things. But I mean, I did flag this up at the time at the meeting too, is that it's very difficult to incorporate the entirety of Greenford at one meeting, which was at one end of Greenford. So a lot of people were missed out in that conversation. And I'm just mindful and would like to highlight that you want to make sure that those missed bits aren't missed again. Whether, you know, I'd be happy to take this offline and have a conversation with you. But if that's happening in my town, that must be happening elsewhere as well. So I'm very, very worried that it might just end up being the same people at the same voices at the same things, but just at a different fora. I know that the North Greenford end is very good at amplifying what they need, and as such have probably got themselves onto this quite early. But there's parts of Greenford Broadway where I'm sure there's community. I mean, I don't know of them, but they might well want to be involved. We have no voice from, say, the Tamil community, of which there's huge numbers. We've not heard anything from our Gurkha community, of which we also have a large number of people living in Greenford. So we're missing huge swathes. This is a lovely starter, but I don't think we're getting to where we need to be getting to. It's literally scratching the surface. And I'm a bit concerned that it might just end up reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I'd say the same in terms of Ealing. There isn't very much commonality between Northfields and West Twyford that isn't borough-wide. You know, I think that's the problem with a lot of the large ones. So yes, Amanda.
Yes, so that's the big philosophical question that is at the heart of a lot of community work, and I think we are. Carol and I and the portfolio holder discuss this weekly. There's a tension between the push to have big meetings in each town and the desire to talk to as many people as possible in as many different ways. And we're trying to find a balance there by saying we need to have this programme of going out to all parts of Greenford, to going out to those groups that we know won't come together at the moment, but may do at some point in the future if we find the right priorities that people want to work on together, or the right projects that people want to work on together. But this is why we want to make sure that we're doing that engagement work and we are hearing from everybody, and we're not just taking the priorities from the people who do want to come into that whole space and talk to us in that kind of way. There are hundreds of different ways that we talk with our communities and build those relationships. So your point goes to absolutely the heart of Your Voice, Your Town, which is we must do the work properly and deeply with multiple members of the community in the places that communities are. We can't expect people from South Greenford to come to North Greenford to have a conversation that they don't know what that conversation is going to be about, and whether that's a trusted space and whether they want to have that conversation. We have got to go to faith groups, we've got to go to mother and toddler groups, we've got to go to the supermarket, we've got to go to the GP, we've got to stand at the bus stop, and we've got to make sure that we talk to as many people as possible. But we also have this pressure to have the set events and to bring the priorities of a town together, so that we make sure that the funding that goes into each of those towns is meaningful. We don't want to, we've moved into a space where we want to join up our funding. So I know in some ways it was easier to manage things in ward forums, but the pots of money were smaller, and the feedback from that was it could be quite divisive, and loud voices got what they wanted in those ward forums. So we're trying to find a way that does both of those things, draws together the funding, draws together the big meaningful projects in a place. And our way of understanding that world is by 7 towns, but we've got to do all that work and that long, deep engagement with communities to understand all those different voices. And it is really complex work. We need to make it less confusing, particularly for our residents and communities. but we can't get away from the fact that it is a new model, and it is a really complex and different way of a council to behave and do things, and we all have to do things in a different way than we've done in the past. So we recognise that complexity, but we absolutely must go and talk to as many people as we can where those people naturally are.
Okay, thanks. So I've got Councillor Young, I saw next.
How much are we paying the management consultants who are advising us on setting this all up?
So we've finished the piece of work with the management consultants. The last piece of that was the training programme. Carol, I don't know if you know that some off the top of your head.
The aggregate of the training, about 70k.
70k is what we've paid those management consultants, and to prompt our thinking and to help us establish this model, because it is completely new for us.
Yeah, so Councillor Haley would like to come in on that point specifically.
Hi Amanda, I just don't want to repeat what Councillor Raza said, but I do agree. As a North Acton councillor, when I did attend the Acton one, there was many communities that weren't attending the events, and somehow when I hear the word community, I feel like we only speak to those who are able to speak, who are able to read, who are able to attend certain events. But my concern would be, what about those who are not able to, speak good English, who are not able to be there for those events, who haven't heard about this event, or who are not able to articulate. And just like in Greenford, North Acton is also divided. It's quite large. We have large community and large residents in North Acton. So it was really sad to see that many of my residents were not able to attend this event, because I don't think it was widely spread. So I know you mentioned earlier that we need to do a lot of work, but I think if we think about hiring interpreters, and I've always gone about this, Ealing is a large, diverse community. We've got so many languages across, and I think sometimes we forget when we're doing all these consultations that we need interpreters to represent the Tamil community, the Punjabi community, the Somali community, the Polish community. There's so many other communities, and I don't want to be negative, but I'm a little bit disheartened attending these events, because I feel like I see the same organization, the same communities who do the work, but sometimes we need to speak to those residents who are also going through difficulties and challenges, who can maybe perhaps bring some different perspective and different ideas that the voluntary sectors are missing, and there's a huge gap between it. So I think that's something we really need to explore in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I am. We've talked about this before. I absolutely agree with that. And I think one of the things that we realised through the research phase was the difference between we went out and we met people where they naturally were, and we talked to them about their priorities, and we invited them to the event. Some people don't want to come to that sort of event, so there is no use us creating those events over and over again, and the same people coming to those events. We have to create multiple events in different places, and we have to go to people where they are. So we did talk to lots of diverse communities, and we work very closely with our voluntary sector partners to make sure that we do have interpreters and we do have representatives to the community, so that we go into those places respectfully and with some empathy and understanding, and with a different perspective. So we absolutely, I couldn't agree more with what everybody's saying. We do have to do. It's almost a kind of one-by-one relationship building with every resident across Ealing. We've got to find a way of reaching further, and we can't just call big meetings and expect people to come. That will not work. We have got to do this in a very different way. Which is why we're proposing, and we learnt a lot through that initial phase, and we learnt a lot about how we show up in a place, and what we ask of communities, what we feed back to communities, and how different we need to be as a council, and that's everybody. So really, this Your Voice, Your Town work is not just a range of projects and things that we're going to do. It's about how our temporary accommodation officers meet with people. It's about how our schools talk with families. It's about everything that we do. We need to frame around this communities in the lead sort of model. So absolutely agree with you that we need to do this in a different way. Otherwise, we will just get a small section of our communities who respond to coming to those sorts of meetings.
Okay, so Councillor Haley, brief follow-up, and then I've got 3 hands up. Yeah.
Just to go back on the on one of the things, building trust, relationship, and creating safe space was on the report. And I know, and I'm glad you said that. But when I attended Southall one, where I was interpreting for my own community Somali background, and also for the women who spoke Arabic, and I think when we did speak about, you know, why were they not participating and how we could encourage them, a lot of the women and a lot of the residents that attended had indicated if we met them in their own place, such as, you know, place of worship, for example, mosque or the gurdwaras, or all those places, or the communities that they hang out, local communities, you know, or maybe the GP. So we talk about building trust, and we love saying these things. We want to be transparency, we want to build trust. But what I really want to see is the essence of how we're going to do it, and have we started doing it? And if we did it, how are we doing it? Are we really truly reaching out? Because I don't want us to be on this project again and return again, and then, you know, we have the similar feedback because we are not able to reach this group. And I think, you know, we also highlight and we also label people saying, oh, they're not really hard to reach. I think as a councillor and, you know, in the Ealing Council Borough, I think sometimes our approach is not in the correct form. And I think we're not trying to, we say we want to understand, but I don't really think we truly want, you know, we're truly understanding as in the way that we should. And I think speaking to those women, it was actually disheartening that the fact that we can take a simple trip to a local GP, a local mosque, a local gurdwaras, and sometimes we that's part of a community, but we don't have the right conversation. And maybe we might need to look at how we could engage on a certain conversation and question styles that we can ask these certain you know, communities. I'll leave it there, but thank you so much, Amanda.
Did you want to come back to that on that, Amanda? Or?
Only to say always helpful, completely agree.
Okay. Right, so I've got Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Mataza, then Councillor Raza. So Councillor Taylor.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I did pre-warn a couple of questions earlier. I think Amanda's kind of alluded to. I suppose one theme that's running through this, because you talked to Amanda, this is a rant slightly as well as the questions now. If the issue is about trust, you've clearly got scepticism around this table at the moment, which is quite worrying in getting this off the ground by, I'm assuming, April next year. So that's one thing. I would want to talk about the role of council. I've not been in these training sessions, and I'm not attending the one on Thursday because it's Diwali on Thursday, and I've not been able to go to the other ones. But the issue about role of councillors is an interesting one. It's about accountability. So if projects are happening and I don't have the same level of perhaps authority where it's been decided, and people in my bit of the ward or whatever don't like what's happening, I'm going to be held accountable. So when I didn't take that decision. So that's one thing. Going to where the communities are, I do acknowledge that, and I think that's good in one sense, but will staff or other agency be available to go to these places as well when they are, and then including all the services? We've got areas in Acton of high levels of private renting, so we have a lot of levels of people who want to engage because they may only be there for a short period of time in an area. So compared to, I don't know, Central Ealing or something, we don't have the same population you know, have a stake in that area because they might move on in 12 months time somewhere else. And there is this thing about the wards. I mean, I know East Acton prior to the boundary change was so huge. It was the biggest in West London, I think, for a while. But when the ward forums themselves were difficult, you'd have HS2 issues in north of the ward, stuff on the Uxbridge Road, which was where I am, and people didn't really relate to that's just one ward. And if you then take the whole of Acton, you know, I've got problems, say, on a council estate in the Vale, for example. I might need some money to fix that, but would the care people in Twyford Avenue care? You know, so it's a difficult one. I don't know what the answer is, but it is difficult to grapple this. But I think the role of members does need to be recognised in some of this as well, because I don't mind, because resident engagement is important. I know when I was out mayor last year, I used to hear a lot of gripes from people across the border. We don't hear our councillors. Some of that's due with COVID legacy, of course. So there is, there is that to engage, definitely. But yeah, that it's sounded like my rant to some extent. Sorry about that. But we do need to bottom this out to some extent, I think, as well. And I think there's also this seems like an endless loop of consultation as well that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I think there were like 4 or 5 questions in there. Amanda, would you like to respond?
Yeah, okay. So let me try and pick those up. So the role of the councillor, I'll perhaps come back to Carol to talk a little bit about the training and why that's been so important and how we're thinking about the role of the councillor. But I think that accountability, we need to be clear about what has changed and what hasn't changed. So your example about your large ward with many different things that people don't want happening if you live in that place, that's always been the same, and we will always have that. There will always be people saying this was not what I voted for and I want something different. That is the nature of big places and human beings. But it's very important in this governance that our councillors are sure of their role in the town teams, and we are sure of the accountabilities, and that's why we had the programme of training, which we realise not everybody's been able to attend every session for lots of different reasons, and we will make sure that material is available in some other way so you can access it. But perhaps Carol might want to come back on the specifics about the role of the councillor. Not sure, Carol, you may not want to. Short-term residents, I think that's another question. That's an interesting point, because you may be short-term resident in a place, but you may want to speak on behalf of the next short-term resident that's coming into the place. So it's as important to get the views of people who may not stay for very long. We know that in some places we do have people who stay for a year and then move on. That's true of our borough. And we need to make sure their views are captured as well. So I think all those views are important. People might be less willing to engage because they think, well, this isn't my future, but there are lots of places people do engage. So people are engaging through tenants associations already. We are picking up the conversations that I had with our housing teams from those short-term residents. So there are many ways to feed in views and opinions into this work. The endless consultation, that is fundamental to Your Voice, Your Town, and that will be ongoing. So it's not consultation and we wait. We can't take action until consultation is finished. It's just a constant conversation with our communities, and that sort of question of going to where people are and having that conversation again and again and again until we've talked across the borough. I'm not sure that I would frame it as consultation. It's more engagement and conversation and dialogue, but that will be ongoing. What were the other 2 questions I missed, if there were 4 or 5 questions in there?
So yeah, I'd like to come back on one of the points, and Councillor Taylor wants to come back on something as well. So on the specifics of the councillor role, I think the issue is, if you've got, and I quite understand philosophically why it's the community in the driving seat, not the councillors, but the issue that Councillor Taylor was raising, I think, is what happens then when the residents come to you and say, why is this thing happening, and the councillor isn't the one that's voted for it. I suppose that's the kind of, so that's sort of democratic legitimacy versus the desire to have it driven by residents. And then Councillor Taylor, you wanted to come back on something as well?
Yeah, I suppose the other thing, man, sorry, just thinking, partly because of my location where I am, we're on the border. So about 10 years ago, we did a project, an East Acton project, because we were awarding the top 10 of worst crime rates in London. I didn't do anything. And the border issues made it difficult. So we did a big project back then. And actually, when I actually look where I live in my huge building, it's like people come out, do they take an interest in Acton and Ealing, or they go towards Westfield and central London? So when I talk about private renting in that sense, people go where their interests are, so in a way, so I'm not saying people don't who are private rented, but it's difficult to capture that. And there is a point, I don't know who said it earlier, there's a lot of things going on in people's lives as well, and whether it's dealing with service charges in the building or doing it with something else, we're not going to get the perfect outcome. You can't force people to the table, of course, as well. But yeah, it's just that point about the private renting, because we're on the border as well. So you won't always get everybody in that. So trust me, we've tried.
Amanda?
So shall I come back about the democratic legitimacy point?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a question more for the political space than the officer space, if you like, because this is a different model that shifts the role of the council, and that communities in the lead model is not just we're going to do more engagement and communities are going to have more of a say. This is actually about making sure that more of that power and choice and accountability actually sits in the community. So where we have seen good models of this communities in the lead, and some are taken to very extreme models where communities are deciding national policy. We've seen a bit of that in France. We have, for example, the Race Equality Commission, where we have a citizens tribunal holding us to account. There are all sorts of different models with communities in the lead, and they all take a different version of that democratic legitimacy and the role of the councillor. So we do have to explore this, and we have to think hard about that new role. And we are trying to create as many opportunities through briefing sessions, through training sessions, through conversations individually with councillors and groups of councillors to explore some of that democratic legitimacy. But I think that's woven into the council plan rather than Your Voice, Your Town work specifically. Our council plan does shift the role of the council and shift the role of the council actually. So it is a conversation that we need to keep having.
Okay, Councillor Mataza.
One of the disadvantage for speaking at the last is most of the points have already been discussed. I completely share the concerns which Councillor Raza and Councillor Haley and Councillor Taylor has risen. I think with regards to consultation or engagements, whatever we are doing, I think there is a little concern that it is taking a little longer. I know we are dealing with a new model and we are still in the teething phase. But I think we also need to think of delivering things as well as the engagement process. With regards to the points which Councillor Haley has risen, the going to the places of worships and using the interpreters. I think Councillor Haley herself set an example where she interpreted in the community and represented the women who actually were not able to speak. I would like to suggest that we can work in a reverse order. As a community leaders, as councillors, we ask our residents that where would they like us to meet. And I give you an example that in Norwood Green, my ward, we approached Gurdwaras, mosques and church. I think we were very welcomed, and the Gurdwara there in Norwood Green, they not only offered their space free of cost, but they offered tea and refreshments as well. So I think maybe perhaps we can think of taking the leading role and guiding the council and the officers that our wards would like to have these forums on these places, and then advertise locally. We have WhatsApp groups in the community, and we take that role as a leader and guide the council on that. And I think everything else has already been said. Thank you.
Okay, Amanda.
Yes, so we would hugely welcome that, and that has been part of the approach to a certain extent. So we have asked all councillors who we should talk to. We haven't asked the question about where we should talk to them, and could we use councillors as a kind of leadership introduction. But that has been, I think, Carol, part of the training, hasn't it, to say that is a role that councillors, we would love you to take up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we will certainly. I mean, I think that's a good recommendation from this committee, and certainly something that we would very much welcome.
Okay, so Councillor Raza, I think you wanted to have another question.
Just being devil's advocate, what if after all of this, we get the community come back to us and say, can we have a ward forum? Because if we're asking them, maybe some of them will come back and say that. I mean, I get asked that quite regularly. We haven't had a ward forum in a long time. How are we, where are we meeting up? How are we doing this? So that's a thing number one. Thing number two, are we in conjunction or having a conversation with the Met Police who are sort of almost parallel with us in trying to set up panels for wards? So they're having a similar conversation as to how to speak to people, because they too have a trust problem. So they're doing that almost parallel to us. So perhaps it might be a good idea to have a little chat with them and see how they're doing it. And maybe there might be a bit of a combined effort. I know that wards forums always used to be either having a pop at the councillors or having a pop at the police. We used to sort of take it in turns. And most of the issues that would pop up would be things like, you know, mundane things like rubbish and parking, which, yes, we struggle with. But how do we stop ourselves from getting back into that rut? Because if you do put the ball into the community's court, it will come back with those things, because that's what we used to get a hell of a lot of. And we still get inside our inboxes are absolutely flooded with it. So there's a couple of points there. Thanks.
Sorry, struggling to. So your first point about we listen to all feedback from communities. We've moved away from ward forums. We haven't had a conversation where people have asked for them. We have communities are keen to engage in their local place, but they want to do it through a variety of mechanisms, which is why we're having this mixed approach about projects, anchor projects, borough projects, activity, and it goes back to the point, I'm sorry, I can't remember who made it, about delivery. Our communities are interested in getting involved if it leads to change and delivery. So the mechanism through which we do that becomes secondary to the activity and the desire of communities to improve where they are. So I think we are open to all feedback, but people are less concerned about the forum and more concerned about the action, I would say. And your second point about the police, we do work closely with the police across all sorts of places. So we work very closely with the police on a local level in wards, but we also work through our local strategic partnership, and they're very cited on this. And in fact, we had attendance at some of the previous meetings and some of the spaces by police colleagues. So we'll continue to work with them on this.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Councillor Mohan.
In terms of allocation of funds to the towns, so all the 7 towns, what will be the criteria? Will it be need-led? Will it be demand-led? So what will be the criteria?
Carol, do you want to respond to her?
But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Shall I respond? It's based on the old, so the number of wards. So we know, I think Acton and Southall has 6 wards. So it's about 120k. So it's 20k revenue per ward. That's just with the funding for this year, but going forward, Amanda had mentioned the percentage we will hopefully leverage through NSIL. but we anticipate the governance structure would be established across the 7 towns to then start thinking through how those amongst the group will decide the criteria in terms of how the funding will be apportioned.
So the £480,000 that we have in the 24-25 budget, we can give you the breakdown of how that's apportioned based on that model of 20,000 per ward.
Thank you.
Right, do I have any more questions before we move to recommendations? Don't think we do. Okay, so I mean, I think we heard right at the start from Councillor Raza about the need for more clarity. And I think that there probably is a recommendation about having a clearer timeline of when when decisions will actually be made on spending on projects, and also the governance arrangements, because we're a long way down the process and still there seems to be a lot that's to be determined. I think there's a recommendation arising out of Councillor Mataza's question about having more of a role for councillors to introduce groups to the officers and to kind of suggest venues and so on based on councillors' knowledge. I think also this might be a bit more contentious, but I mean, Councillor Young asked right at the start about the cost of the consultants of 70,000. I think is there a question there about whether there ought to be some sort of review on value for money there, because we spent that and we still have a lot of unanswered questions about how it's actually going to work. Throw that open about whether that's worthwhile. Councillor Taylor.
Not so much the last one. I think just going slightly back to the role of councillor, I think the recognition, Amanda, and maybe it's a message to Cabinet, is that we are community leaders ourselves, and I think that's been forgotten in this. And this, I know if it was flippant or not when he said it was like, give us your contacts. I spent 14 years building up those relationships, and I need to know that whoever it is just goes in and doesn't upset those relationships, because you have to cultivate them. I've got people who are, dare I say, all due respect to Tony, young opposite me, but they were Tory voters, but you build that trust. They still may not vote for me, but the trust they have with the local councils and delivering things. And I don't want that to be gone, because suddenly I get bypassed as a councillor on something, and that's important that we're able to maintain those relationships. So whilst we can give you some, I don't know everybody in the ward, it's a changing ward, but and given a high level turnover, I said earlier, but those relationships are important for us as councillors to maintain, and we're not just going to be looked over. Some of it's not geographical, some of it's cultural relationships as well. So, and that's important that we're able to maintain that, and that's trust. People come to us, especially those of ethnic minority. They come to us because they do trust us on issues that they couldn't necessarily, trust the council, if you like, in a broader sense.
Yeah. So more of a recognition of the sort of community leadership, existing community leadership role of councillors, and working with councillors to approach communities as opposed to just handing over contacts. Yeah. Councillor Raza.
I just quickly want to add to that, just to say it's also just again with the geographical thing. People in Greenford are very angry at the moment because they're being subjected to 5 years of HS2. That might not be something that council officers would know. And when you go in, I'm using that as an example, but you do need to be sensitive to the community that you're going into. I'm not saying that you haven't been, Amanda, but it's one of those things that we would know about. So the fact that we aren't asked or told when you're going to a certain place, it's just to help you. It's not a case of, we want to detract from your work or anything, but letting us know that you're doing stuff. Maybe we can come along, maybe we can't. But we don't feel that our leadership role or in the community has been maximised in this piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a I think there's certainly a recommendation in terms of making sure that councillors and community groups are given proper notice about everything that's, so not just the large formal meetings, but any time there's an engagement exercise, it's not just a question of thinking, well, councillors might be there. It's a question of saying, right, tell the councillors in the area, and then councillors may want to engage with that. Yeah. Councillor Young.
Councillor Paul.
Yes.
May I just offer a small response? Just because I absolutely have to say we have not said to councillors, give us your contacts and we'll take it from there. We have carefully wrapped around this the role of the councillor. It is front and centre of this work we've put in the training. Councillor Haley is an excellent example of where we've said, how will we do this? And Councillor Haley has said, I will come, I will interpret, I will represent. We have very carefully said, what's the right approach? So we have said who are the right people to talk to, how might we go about doing that. We haven't picked up the point about, and we have actually taken some advice on going to communities where they are. We haven't said which venues should we use for these bigger meetings, and we absolutely, it is always our intention, as Carol said, to share that whole programme of events that are going on, and councillors are absolutely our main community advocates. We know this is what your roles are built on, and it's so important for the council. So I just wanted to come back in and be absolutely clear that councillors are front and centre of this. It is not about saying we're ignoring the role of the councillor and putting something else in. And we've taken such a lot of care to set up those opportunities to have the training, to have the conversations, to work with councillors in their local places. So very, a recommendation about doing more of that is great and what we would all welcome. But I would absolutely strongly contest that we've said, give us your contacts and we will follow up from there. That's just not the way that this could possibly work.
Yeah, we won't word it quite like that. Councillor Young. Yeah.
You say you've involved councillors, but my ward councillors, my fellow ward councillors and I have not been approached to see how we can help in this process. Not at all.
I mean, I think there was a general when the previous set of briefings, there was a mention that councillors could feed information in.
Well, the briefing's another issue. We got such short notice.
But they were very short notice. A lot of people understand
the briefings and the meetings themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
We had no say in the dates. They were organised at very short notice. We were just told, come along or don't, depending on your diary.
That's right. I mean, that has
not very satisfactory.
That has been, but hence the recommendation about clarity on timeline and so on. Yeah, Councillor Mohan. Mike.
If I remember it right, I think councillors were invited to the South Hall event. I also attended that.
So councillors
had that opportunity.
Yeah, councillors were invited to each of the initial town events, and councillors were also invited to the initial briefings. But as Councillor Young said, in both cases the notice was incredibly short, so a lot of councillors couldn't make them. Any other suggestions or recommendations? Oh, I can see people are thinking, but no. Okay, great. So there was one about more clarity on timeline and governance. There was one about how councillors are involved, the sort of role of council. Trying to word it in a neutral way. Recognising better. Yeah, that's right. So recognising the existing community leadership role of councillors and involving them more in setting up the town teams and suggesting venues and so on. Yeah, so I think involving more, so we're not being too attacking on that. And then the other one that I suggested, but no one's no one's really commented either way on it, was about whether we should look into whether the 70,000 was well spent or not, considering that we're not in a very clear state at the moment. I would think that, but I think the majority, I won't bother taking a vote. The majority doesn't seem to be in favour of that one, so we'll leave that. Yeah. Well, that's right. So that was, so I guess the first one is kind of two things, isn't it? There's the clarity on governance and so on, and there's clarity on timelines. So each step of the way going forward, we want to have more notice and a clearer timetable, so that councillors and residents can understand the process, because I think that's it. It's not that there is, well, going right back to what Councillor Raza said right at the start. There is the whole process is confusing, I think, to councillors and to residents. Yeah, great. Okay, all right. I think we're at the end of the item. Thank you very much to Amanda and Carol. I'm sorry it was a bit bruising, but we're critical friends, and I'm sure everyone supports the overall aim of engaging more residents than have been engaged in previous processes. I think we're just on to date of next meeting, aren't we? Yeah, so the date of the next meeting is the 28th of January, 2025. So may I be the first to wish you a happy Christmas. Yes. Okay, great. Thanks very much. Thanks. Right. Good. Yeah. Oh yeah, sure, I can do. Yes. Do himself.